Former SpaceX engineer raises $50 million to build Tesla for freight trains. Trains may be an old technology, but they are still remarkable machines operating with roughly 4 times the energy efficiency of semi-trucks driving on a highway. However, over the past several decades, railways have been working against themselves. To compete with semis, they've ceded shorter deliveries. Instead, railways have doubled down on long-haul shipments of 1,000 miles or more. And to maximize efficiency on long routes, train companies have simply kept making trains longer and longer. Today, it's relatively common for trains to be nearly 3 miles long. 3 years later, with $50 million of Series A funding in hand, he's sharing his solution. Now the CEO of Parallel Systems, Sal, alongside the co-founders who both led major engineering initiatives at SpaceX, is transforming individual freight train cars into autonomous electric vehicles. The company's potential impact is in its ability to redesign the way freight transported, moving shipments that would have been delivered by truck to a more efficient train. Understanding that impact requires dipping your toe into the 143,000 miles of U.S. railway. Dean Wise is the former vice president of network strategy at BNSF Railway. He is also one of several established industry advisors who Parallel Systems has brought in to help navigate the relatively closed industry of freight transport. You actually are not going to get into this game unless the railroads themselves are going to invite you in, Wise explains. The rail industry in North America is basically privately held and privately funded. And they can say, we don't like this. Parallel Systems plans to make money by providing its technology to the railroads, rather than competing with them. Meanwhile, railroads make money by charging clients to move their goods. In the U.S. and across North America, 5 regional companies operate the vast majority of railways, and you might recognize them by their distinctive train engines. Union Pacific is the largest, with routes from the Midwest to the West. BNSF has a similar footprint, but reaches north where up reaches south. Then you have CSX and Norfolk Southern from the Midwest out east. And pushing north, that's the territory of Canadian National. While long trains are profitable for the train companies, they're not terribly efficient for anyone else. A long train is full of goods that need to be delivered to all sorts of different places. Once they reach a depot, that's when those goods are handed off to semi-trucks. Not to mention that parking a 3-mile-long train vastly limits where it can go. Furthermore, train cars are often parked for days while they wait for other cars to be loaded and unloaded, so that they can move, as this giant caterpillar, to their next destination. Sal estimates the longest Parallel Systems train might run a half-mile long. But with shorter lengths, train yards themselves can be re-architected to have smaller footprints and fit more places. In our infrastructure, Parallel's platoons can also split themselves in half if blocking an intersection for too long. Because the train cars don't even couple together, it's easy for them to break rank and let road vehicles pass through their middle. We can do unique things like take a container from a port to a warehouse. And you never have to put it on a truck, Sal says. And because you don't have to put it on a truck, you can load more weight. Parallel Systems cars can carry 128,000 pounds, or 2.8 times more than a semi-truck. They also recharge in an hour, without being plugged in or pulled off the track. The wheels can be recharged to drive another 500 miles. Perhaps self-driving, environment-saving trains that squeeze into our existing railway infrastructure sound too good to be true. Indeed, anyone following railroads knows that short-haul lines have been proposed as a solution to the industry's woes for years. But Sal points out that compared to building autonomous electric vehicles for highways, building and managing autonomous electric trains is far simpler. Because rails are simpler. Trains stay on a track without a steering wheel. They also don't need to worry about responding to random traffic. Unlike roads, where pretty much anyone can drive anywhere at any time, railways are tightly controlled and scheduled. Truthfully, some passenger trains have driven themselves since the 1960s. Parallel Systems is simply pushing that autonomy to the individual car level. The technology isn't ready for market yet. Parallel Systems has been testing a prototype since November 2020 on 50 miles of track in California. The company is currently finishing up its second-generation prototype, which it plans to begin testing this year. Until that testing is done, the company is declining to forecast its commercial launch. Though don't be surprised to see more pilot testing done in conjunction with railway lines. First, That said, if parallel systems can move fast enough, perhaps it can get ahead of the electric semi-truck revolution. Tesla recently delayed the availability of its electric semi, while California has targeted 2045 for its zero-emission truck mandate. There's a lot of talk about making trucks autonomous, and a lot of talk about electric trucks. And many railroads are wondering what their future going to look like when those are realities. Sal says, "We think trucks are going to stay, but what we're doing is trying to shift the balance." Elon Musk proposes to send Starlink terminals to Tonga to help restore internet access. Elon Musk is offering Starlink terminals to Tonga residents after a recent underwater volcanic eruption led to a loss of internet access in the country. The eruption occurred on January 15 with a powerful blast yield of around 10 megatons. It subsequently triggered a tsunami that tore through the country's 827 km undersea internet cable, cutting off the island's communication links. Tonga has begun to restore some access to the internet since the volcanic eruption, according to Doug Maud-Dory, Director of Internet Analysis at Kent IK. First signs of life for internet connectivity out of Tonga since the volcanic eruption. TCC started coming back via satellite earlier today, Maud-Dory tweeted on Thursday, in response to a Reuters story reporting that Tonga's internet won't be fully restored for at least a month. Musk tweeted, "Could people from Tonga let us know if it is important for SpaceX to send over Starlink terminals?" His tweet brought to light a letter written by Shane Reddy, a New Zealand Parliament member. The letter was shared by another user. In it, Reddy requested urgent Starlink internet communications for Tonga. Musk replied he was seeking clear confirmation for Starlink terminals given it is a hard thing for the team at SpaceX as they don't have enough satellites with laser links. There are more than 1,650 Starlink satellites in orbit. The satellite internet network serves users in 14 countries including the US, Canada, and Australia. In a recent report, Musk said he wanted to expand the service to India by deploying 200,000 Starlink user terminals to the country by December 2022. Yahoo employees evacuated one after another, and new owner Apollo began to restructure the company. A number of staffers have exited Yahoo in recent weeks as part of a business restructure, one of the first major changes made under the company's new ownership. Private equity firm Apollo Global Management. Affected roles span sales, partnerships, and some global country managers, according to sources familiar with the matter and the LinkedIn posts of Yahoo employees announcing their departures this week. Around 2% of the business division was affected, according to a person with direct knowledge of the matter. "We always look for ways to make Yahoo a more effective company, which includes routine decisions on team structure that are made in support of an overall, healthier business for our people and culture," a Yahoo spokesperson said. The move comes after Yahoo and America Online, then known as Verizon Media, was sold by the telecom giant to Apollo for $5 billion in September last year. Tinder CEO Jim Lanzoni was named to lead the company, rebranded to simply Yahoo, as its chief executive later that month. When the deal was first announced earlier in 2021, Verizon Media staffers had expressed concerns about potential layoffs under the new ownership, especially given the history of private equity firms squeezing media companies for margins. Indeed, Apollo's financial backing of Gannett led to unease among Verizon Media insiders about sharp cost cuts. Insider reported last May. In a memo to Yahoo staff in September, obtained by Insider, Lanzoni wrote that he was not coming in to create change for the sake of it, but rather to work with all of you to continue your winning ways as the new Yahoo. Apollo had also said it planned to invest in growth across the business. Lanzoni is charged with turning around a business that never lived up to the ambitions Verizon had set out for it. Verizon spent $9 billion in total acquiring America Online and Yahoo in the hopes of taking on Google and Facebook's digital advertising duopoly. It ended up writing down its media investments by almost $5 billion, having failed to capture a significant portion of the digital ad market despite owning assets like the highly trafficked Yahoo.com homepage and Yahoo Mail. Large rounds of layoffs have been common at Yahoo and America Online over the years as the companies sought to align the size of their businesses with their performance. Yahoo executives have said Apollo's plan to turn around the company involves a focus on commerce, content, and sports betting. The former Verizon Media had already returned to revenue growth prior to the Apollo acquisition. Apple and Google are pleading with us lawmakers not to pass antitrust regulation challenging App STO. Apple and Google have gone on the defensive amid a push for tough new antitrust legislation. In the US, the tech giants could face massive financial losses if the key bills see both co-sponsored by Democratic Sen. Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota make it through Congress. In a letter seen on Tuesday by Bloomberg and addressed to Klobuchar, Apple's Senior Director of Government Affairs Tim Powderly warned the Open App Markets Act, originally unveiled in June, would put consumer safety at risk. If passed, the legislation would allow users to sideload apps from third-party sources onto their phones, undermining the dominance of Apple's App Store on iPhones and Google's Play Store on Android devices. Both firms would potentially miss out on the commission they charge app developers to place apps on their respective stores. In his letter, Powderly wrote that Apple had rigorous security standards in place for the apps it allows on its phones, and argued users would be at greater risk if they download apps from elsewhere. After a tumultuous year that witnessed multiple controversies regarding social media, whistleblower allegations of long-ignored risk to children, and ransomware attacks that hobbled critical infrastructure, it would be ironic if Congress responds by making it much harder to protect the privacy and security of Americans' personal devices. He wrote, "Unfortunately, that is what these bills will do." Meanwhile, Google's legal chief Kent Walker published a blog post on Tuesday, in which he warned App Store regulations and the American Innovation and Choice Online Act also proposed last summer together risk handicapping America's technology. Leaders could threaten America's national security. Under the latter set of proposals, companies would be banned from using their platforms to prioritize their own products ahead of competitors. In practice, this could stop Google from positioning its own services, for example Google Flights, Google Travel, or Google Maps at the top of its search engine results. On Tuesday, a coalition of more than 40 smaller tech companies including search engine DuckDuckGo, QA website Quora, and Silicon Valley startup factory Y Combinator, signed an open letter backing the Choice Online Act, warning that dominant technology companies have made it difficult for other businesses to compete. But Google's Walker wrote that lawmakers shouldn't rush to judgment, adding, "An innovation by permission requirement could force American technology companies to get approval from government bureaucrats before launching new features or even fixing problems, while foreign companies would be free to innovate." Insider approached Apple and Google for comment. Economists say less than 35% of the $800 billion PPP loans actually go to workers. The bulk of the loan money handed out through the government's $800 billion Paycheck Protection Program didn't go to workers, it helped business owners and shareholders. That's the finding of a new study published by top economists at the National Bureau of Economic Research. The group, which includes 10 professors and researchers, among them MIT economics professor David Ottoar and several Federal Reserve economists, writes in their paper that the vast majority of PPP loans given out during the first round of disbursements in 2020 weren't used to offset employee paychecks. Based on the numbers they crunch, primarily coming via data from payroll management behemoth ADP, they estimate that somewhere between 23% and 34% of PPP dollars went to workers who would have otherwise lost their jobs. The rest of the loan money, a full 2/3 to 3/4, landed in the pockets of either the company's owners or shareholders. The authors estimate the program did manage to preserve 2 to 3 million of what they call job years of employment, meaning PPP's impact on job loss was potentially considerable. But this came at a cost of $170,000 to $257,000 per job year saved, the average amount disbursed by the government. They note that 94% of the companies that applied for a PPP loan received a PPP loan, but because the criteria for loan forgiveness required keeping employees on payroll, yet also capped payroll costs at $100,000 in cash compensation per employee. That means the lion's share went elsewhere. Equally troublingly, the distribution was highly regressive, because it overwhelmingly accrued to high-income households. According to their paper, 72% of funds flowed to the top 1/5 of households by income. Even though, statistically speaking nationwide, this group accounts for just 35% of earnings. They are the government's two other pandemic aid programs, pandemic unemployment insurance And the stimulus checks were spread far more equitably among American households. Numerous studies before now have guessed the total amount of fraud with PPP was high. And these stories have popped up frequently in the media anecdotally. One of the more recent estimates, released in August, guessed the amount of fraud among PPP loans could be serious as high as 15%. That's another factor the authors note. Ironically, the program feature that arguably made PPP's meteoric scale-up possible is also the feature that made it potentially the most problematic. The program was essentially untargeted. They write that companies merely needed to attest that they were substantially affected by COVID-19 to qualify. And almost all did so. They conclude that a large proportion of PPP loan dollars likely went to businesses that would have remained viable and retained their employees even absent PPP.